Welcome, folks. There may be a little bit of weirdness in all of this because we have a delay at our end. So maybe the FCC is doing that so they can mute me if I say something I'm not supposed to. Welcome. And we are here tonight for a live stream for the powder printer for a bunch of cool tips and tricks we're going to show you. It is super strange for me because I'm just talking to a camera and I can't hear or see anybody, but I'm going to trust that you are all there. And from the sounds of it, what's going on in the chat, I think you are. So first, before we do anything, let me just, there's a snowman. This is one of the new powder wafers we've done. It was the first ever dress him up powder wafer, where you make all the little parts, if you haven't seen this, and you have 3 mouths to choose from. I, of course, went with the buck teeth. And you've got the actual stencil has both a scarf and a necktie, 2 sizes of noses, and I think some other stuff. So thank you, everybody, for being here. We are coming to you from the hill country in Texas, in our secret lair. We have a bunch of stuff to show you tonight. There's a lot of it. Actually, I've got about 12 different things to show you, but probably half of them are really quick. So my best guess is this may take an hour. We will see. But we're going to jump right into it. And if you, well, I was going to say if you have any questions, ask them, but I can't hear all of you guys. So let's see where we're going to go. First, I want to start out actually talking about sifting. And when folks email and ask for help, or I see stuff online, I think the biggest kind of the gap in knowledge and experience maybe people have where they run into problems is actually just the basic sifting and getting the powder uneven into the right amount. So we're going to start there. And I'm going to show you a little trick. I'm going to flip to the overhead camera. I have a light box or a light panel here. You can see it's real bright. And then I know you probably get a little bit of rolling on the screen. That's the frequency. I can't really do anything about that. But we're going to use that to show you one of the ways you can get better at sifting powder evenly. And that is one of the key things when you're making powder wafers, is to make sure that the powder is even. So we are going to start with, we'll just pick out any old stencil. And we'll do this guy right here. I don't know how well you can see him. And this is a design we have. It's funny. This is one of the old first generation stencils with the square corners. But in fact, we're not going to use that. Don't worry. By the time we get halfway through these tips, I'll have my act together. We're actually just going to start right on this board. And I want to show you something. If I take a sifter full of powder, and this is how a lot of people sift powder. Either they do this, which is real common, and you'll get that down, and you may even make it so it looks kind of even, but you really don't know until you shine a light through it. And so if I go here and turn this on, you can all see how something that looks pretty even when you're just looking at it like that actually is really not even at all. So let me show you the best way, in my experience, to get a nice, even coat of powder. And again, I'm just going to do it on this paper. And you can do this. This is a great way to practice. I have a jar of what I call magic brown powder. And this is the stuff that is extra from other projects over the years, you know, oversift and stuff. I just throw it in a jar. It's great for practicing. But you can do anything because you can save this powder and reuse it. There's a clean piece of white paper. I'm going to start by turning the light off. And sifting powder is a lot like spraying paint. If you want to get the most even coverage, you want to do lots of very light coats overlapping. So I go up high. When you go up high, it spreads further apart. And when you spray paint, you get a bigger spray. It's real similar. And you know, if you've ever tried to spray paint and you go too close, it's really easy to get thick, runny spots. And powder, although it doesn't run down the page, you get the same unevenness. So really lightly, back and forth. I change directions after each pass, but you know, I'm a good 6 to 8 inches above. And it is not unusual when I'm doing a powder wafer in the powder printer to make 6 or even 8 light passes to build it up. There. And so it looks even now, but let's see if it is. I hope it is, or I'm going to be embarrassed. And you can see there that it is much, much more even than what we had before. It's still got a little bit of lightness, but that's actually more for me not putting enough coverage on it. So if you're having problems getting powder to go evenly, I would suggest pick up one of these light panels. They're pretty cheap now. I remember when big light boxes used to cost a fortune, and now you can get these things on Amazon and they're not expensive. But when you are sifting powder, if you put a piece of paper down and do like this, again, it's a really good way to practice, and you will get a feel for what even sifting is. So we got a question if a regular tea strainer works as well as these guys. Most of them actually do. In fact, I am pretty sure before people started using these for glass that this exact same thing was available as a tea strainer. Hence the hanging on the side of the mug handles and stuff. Most of these meshes are 80 mesh screens. For whatever reason, it turned out that the perfect mesh 80 for tea ended up being perfect for powder. So tea balls work well. I've got some other sifters. You know, these guys are both also they're little strainers, but they're from the OXO, and the mesh on these is pretty much the same as on the other one. They might be a little bit bigger, but they still work pretty well. And if you have these guys, these work really well. The big difference being that obviously these are flat bottom, and these cost an arm and a leg because I think there's just somebody who sits in a room gluing the little pieces of screen to the bottom. They're very handmade, and I think they're all made by Thompson Enamel, though I'm not sure. The difference between these two sifters, and folks who have taken my some of my classes will know this, is that the round sifter is like a can of spray paint. When you sift, it feathers out around the edge. So for overlapping in big areas, this one is better. When you are trying to place powder, these are better, especially because, let me grab this other one. These come in different sizes, and there's one that's even smaller. They're awesome to have. They let you get into little places. Sometimes when you're working with a stencil and you want to just get right into one part, the little flat ones are excellent for that. I will see if I can find a good link for them, and I will give you links when I post the recording for this live stream. We will go ahead and include some other information like links for anything we talk about, including the sifters. So let me go ahead and dump all this back. And the second thing I want to talk about, and we're going to get rid of this.
Does the technique work with enamels too?
Someone asked if this technique, sifting, works with enamels. It does work with enamels. You want to be careful only because you don't want to build up nearly as thick with enamels as you do with powder. You can run into compatibility issues if enamels get too thick. Thompson enamel makes a fairly coarse enamel, and in fact, it sifts really well, but it works better on 96 Oceanside more reliably, or at least it used to on Spectrum, and they've got a separate line for float glass. That works really well on float glass. I have found that their hot glass enamel that they say works on 96 and Bullseye. Every so often, I've run into compatibility issues with Bullseye. So be careful with enamels just that you don't put them too thick. But that's actually a plus when you're working with powder wafers, because a lot of times you want to get some intense color, but you don't want to have to build the powder up really thick. And that's a great place to use powdered enamels. The next thing we're going to do, I want to show you, and again, this is really basic, but it's interesting that it is one of the areas that we have had a lot of questions from customers who, it's funny, the things you think are obvious, and then you realize there's no reason that you should think that they're obvious when people ask you about them. And that is, so I'm going to hold this in an angle so you can see it. So here's one of the stencils. This is a pattern stencil. We have a whole bunch of these. We've got the bricks and the little hearts, and there's, I think, like 40 or 50 at this point, but there's a lot of pattern stencils. And people have emailed and still email every so often going, you know, I did it, but how do I just fire the pieces? What do I do? How do I get a whole piece? And some of you may have seen this piece on Facebook. I posted it about a week ago, and this was done with this stencil. And what I did not do was make a bunch of circles and then place them. The way that pattern stencils work is there is an expectation after you do the pattern that you then lift it up and put down the square stencil and sift over the whole thing. That gives it a solid backing that you can use as a big piece. So I'm going to go ahead and reproduce how I made this one to show you how that works. Everybody should have one of these. If you were one of the first people to buy a powder printer, when we did that initial powder printer, the package deal, you have a set of squares, and the biggest one is this square stencil. We also started, after that, putting a sampler in that has a sampler stencil, and then there's also in your sampler stencil envelope one of these big squares. If you are in, there was a little window between when we shipped out the first batch and then we realized that people were buying the powder printer with no stencils, and we felt bad because we're like, they're going to get this, they can't do anything with it. So we started putting in the sampler and we put in the squares. If you're one of the people in that little narrow window who didn't ever get a sampler and you didn't buy the original studio pack, just send an email to help@fusingfactory.com and we will get you a sampler pack. So we're going to reproduce this, and that way you can see how we use a pattern stencil and also see how I did the colors on that. To start out with, we are going to put down the circles. And for the circles, I used yellow and red, but you will also notice there's a little bit of kind of a, here, let me set that there, see if, well, there's a little bit of speckling in here. It's kind of almost, for lack of a better word, kind of a grunge look, but they're not these bright, clean circles. And the way I did that was I actually started with what is going to be the background, which is a venturing green. And I took a sifter. That's the very first thing. Remember, when we make powder wafers, it is designed down, so whatever goes down first ends up being on top. And I just did a couple of light, that's it. And I don't even know if you can see that, if you can see that little bit of green. It's not much, it's just some little salt and pepper kind of deal. And then, whenever you change colors, you always want to remember to lift your stencil up and dump it off, because there, you can actually see a little better there where that green, the little speckling is without the stencil on it. The reason you want to dump that is so whatever color I do next, I don't contaminate, and I can put it back in the jar because the stencil is now clean. I'm going to take some opalescent red and
Are there plain stencils so they can cut their own artwork?
we are going to put, we keep saying this, but we are going to put stencils blanks, which is basically going to be one of these stencils with nothing cut out of it, but it'll have the trademarked little double peak there for alignment. We are going to put those on the website, but they are 1 millimeter PET plastic, which is pretty thick. So unless you have a laser, they're hard to cut. You can cut them with, they make X-Acto knives that are heated. Those will work as well. Laser engraver cutters, most of them, if they're decent powered, will cut through this stuff. Crickets and, silhouettes, they will not work on this stuff. It's too thick and rigid. So I put down some of my red, not quite the same place I put it there, but you can kind of get the idea. I'm going to take my red away. I'm done with my red. I'm going to take my stencil off again so I can dump off that red and reclaim it. And you see how this is starting to build up? Put it back. Go ahead. And I'm going to take my yellow. And this is where I'm going to go over the whole thing. Now, you'll notice that my sifter is low on powder. Sifters will sift much more evenly and more predictably when you fill them up. So even if you don't need a lot of powder, it is beneficial to load it and then just dump it back. All right, so that is my yellow. I'm going to go ahead and lift that up. And now I have all my dots. And this was the part that a lot of people were confused because the stencil only comes this one thing in the envelope, and you really need the second one to put a backing on it. And obviously the reason we don't put a backing in each one is because you only need one for all your stencils, and it would seem kind of silly to charge you for another stencil every time you bought a background when you only needed one that you could share between them. So now I have my background on, and I'm going to go and take my aventurine green, dump that, go ahead and add a little bit more. Again, load up that sifter. And there we go. When that fires, it will be very much like the wafer that is in the middle of this. I like showing this one too because people are like, well, I don't want to use stencils because everybody's work looks the same, and it really doesn't. The way you can mix and match stencils and pick different colors and combine them, there are lots of options. Let me get rid of this. So one of the questions is, it's a good one, is do you need to wear a mask? And the answer to that is it is always a good idea to wear a mask whenever you are sifting something or using a powdered material that can get in the air, no matter what it is. Now, in the world of respiratory hazards, glass is definitely on the list. It is not as high on the list as, for example, fired fiber paper, but that doesn't make it safe. If you wear a mask, just remember, the particles that are most dangerous to you are the particles that you breathe in, obviously, that you respirate, the ones that float in the air. And those little tiny particulates can actually float and hang in the air for over an hour. So if you wear a mask and then when you're done sifting, you just take off the mask, you maybe didn't need to put it on in the first place because you're not protecting yourself.
You've only sifted over the stencils about 3 times. Is that all that's needed, or will it be too thin?
I did only go over it about 3 times, and that was because different powders also fall at different rates. That particular aventurine green falls a little heavier. And because I'm doing a demo, I didn't want you to sit and wait forever. The way you tell is, which is actually a good segue into the next one, is the way you can tell that you've got enough is that you want to stop it. You know, it fills up the recess in the stencil. So, you know, as you do it, it gets right to the edge. It fills up this little void. You want to stop before it covers the edge. And the reason is when it covers the edge, it's kind of like a snowbank at that point. You can't quite see the edge. It's that rounded pile of powder. At that point, when you lift it up, there is powder that is going to fall down outside the design area. In a minute, I'm going to show you how you can go deeper if you want to go thicker, even if you run up it to that limit. I'm going to show you that in a minute. But before we do that, we're going to talk, someone asked about capping and flipping. At the end, one of the last things I'm going to talk about is how you fuse these to glass, sandwiching them between clear and stuff like that. So we are going to get to that. So let's see. So I want to show you, let's go ahead with this one. Let's say I am doing this stencil. It's one of our Lotus stencils. And this stencil has got, you will notice, move this out of the way. So I want to see, I think you can see these okay on camera. So here are 2 flower stencil sets. This is that one. And I don't think I brought the envelope over, but you can see this is the that one there. And they are both 3 stencil sets, but there is a very important difference between them. You will notice, I'm going to go ahead and make this one. I'm going to start with, and I am going to do this quickly. I'm not going to put on for this as much powder as I normally would because I don't need to show you what I want to show you. But let's start here with the first stencil. Okay, I'm just going to, just enough so you can see it. We'll pretend I put more on. Lift it up. There's that. Easy enough. Now I go to the next stencil, number 2. And I'm going to sift my next color. You'll notice every time I put a stencil down, the stencil is only touching the shelf. None of the stencil is hitting any of the powder I've already put down. That's true of that one. I could go and put that down, and, well, I'll go ahead and do it. All right, so that one. And then when I put the last one on, again, clear and free. The stencil, each stencil that comes next only touches shelf, doesn't disturb or touch the powder. Not all of our stencils are like that. For example, watch what happens with this Lotus stencil. I'm going to go do number 1. And again, I'm just doing it really light so you can see it. I'm not actually going to fire these, so I'm not going to go as high as I normally would. But there's number 1. Isn't that pretty? Number 2 is just like before. Where the stencil doesn't touch the powder. But what happens? Oh, you know what? I'm wrong. Dang, I grabbed the wrong stencil. Hold on 1 second. Sorry about that, guys. The excitement of live broadcast. So, we're going to do a different one. And you all see, I think you can see that. So, what I wanted to show you so that's number 1. Here's the issue. Stencil number 2 actually rests parts of it. And when you push it down, it's real easy because you're touching it to mess it up. Because this stencil, the opening doesn't fully encompass what's already down. So the stencil hits the powder. And we don't want that. This is another place that the square comes in. We use it as a spacer. If you put that down, I can now take and do this one, and the stencil is raised just above the powder so that I can still sift. I can still get a really good crisp design, but my stencil isn't messing up the powder that's already there. I put that back. Go to the next one. And again, sift the next color. And it's so close to the shelf that the powder still falls straight down. Any of you who have ever done silk screening with powder know this, that you don't have to have your stencil right on what you're stenciling on. If it's just raised a little bit above, in that little teeny drop between the stencil and the shelf, there's really only one place for the powder to go, and that's straight down. And so that is the other use. One of the other uses for these squares is as a spacer to lift up the stencil so it doesn't squish powder that's already been down if it's one of the ones that overlaps.
That's something you recommend we do with all stencils that may touch.
Yeah, I do it anytime. The question was, do I recommend you do it with all stencils that touch? I do, because it doesn't hurt anything. And I've had designs where, and it's especially true if you get one of the designs where the first thing goes down are like little dots or circles, and then it takes very little to touch them. And your little perfect circle becomes this little oblong spot. So anytime I have stencils where it's not a clear cut through to the next one where the stencil touches existing powder, I use a spacer. And once in a while, I'll actually, if it's a four color stencil and it's getting a little thick, I might even put 2 squares in to raise it up a little bit more.
That you have different thicknesses for the spacer.
We don't have, the question is, do we have different thicknesses? We don't. Rarely do I need 1 or 2 thicknesses. So I just keep a couple of spacers available. Now I'm going to show you another use for the spacer. All right, so we're going to use this stencil. This is one of the most popular stencils. And it is also one of the most challenging. And that is because these when you have narrow details, it is harder to build up height without having it go over the edge. And so a lot of times what will happen is you sift and you're trying to get it thick because, you know, if it's not thick, it's going to be really hard to use the files and clean up the little thin branches. So we want them to have some heft to them. But because they're thin little branches, it can be really tough. And so this is, I think, a really cool way to get around that. I am going to go ahead and sift. I said 8 before. As I'm doing this, 8 may be overstating it. I never really counted. I just always go by look, which is what you should do. All right, I'm going to switch cameras here. You see, I want you to look right. Give that. All right, you can all see, if you look right here, that's not blurry in the camera. That is, the powder is just starting to cover the edge. See the rest of here, all this, you can see that nice crisp edge of the stencil, but here we're starting to lose it a little bit. That's how we know we don't want to go any further, because if we go and build up a lot of that, that's the stuff that's going to fall down. So this is pretty close to the height I try to go to. And what's nice, and the reason it's really good to take your time and do many light sifts, is to have it all build up evenly. But I'm going to take this off. And now, I'll see how I've got a nice, for the most part, really nice crisp lines. I'm going to take that square stencil, put it down. This is part of the beauty of having these aligners up at the top. I can put this back exactly where it was. And now I have elevated the stencil, and the bottom of the stencil is now right at the top of where the powder was. So I can take my sifter, Start going again. And I'm going to do the same thing. And you can see how thick the stencil is. This was the one place, I'll clean that up in co-working, but I was able to make the stencil twice as thick by using a spacer after the first sift to go to the second. Oh, this is a quick tip. How many of you have ever, how many of you have ever made a wafer and fired it and had it curl up on you? That is what happens when you fire too hot. And it can be really hard to avoid because every powder color is a little bit different where it's a perfect temperature. And here's a super quick and easy tip. You take your wafer, you put it on a shelf, kiln wash shelf. You gently set another kiln wash shelf face down on top of the wafer and run it through another wafer schedule. And what will happen is the weight of the wafer will perfectly flatten down. It's a great way if you've got every so often I'll get a great wafer, except that one of the corners or something has curled up. And it's really hard, if not impossible, to use those in a project because when you go to try to fuse it, you typically, because that piece is sticking up and you set the glass on top and it breaks. So if you've got a wafer that's curled, go ahead and put another shelf on top. We've also found that when we're doing the little wafer dishes, if you go back, if you haven't seen the first live stream that we did where we showed how to make the little wafer bowls, firing those with another shelf on top face down can give you really good results. That's flattening curls. So let's see. Oh, I know what I want to show too. Let's say that you have, go a little closer. Let's say you've got a wafer.
For your weights, you're using the little shelves, right? Between the little shelves.
What was that?
When you're putting the wafer between shelves, it's the little shelves.
Yeah, when I talk, I'm sorry. Yeah, when I talk about putting the wafer between shelves, it's literally the same shelves you're doing, the little 6-inch ones. It's all the weight you need. I think if you put anything bigger than that, you're probably going to break and crush your wafer. So here's one of the new designs we came out with. It's a cute little snowman. It's not as cute. No, we'll leave him there. We're not as cute as the bucktooth snowman, but this is just a one stencil design. And these little hands, they are insanely delicate. And so I really don't want to have to take a file to one of those. So what I do when I make these is I sift them so that I don't come near the top of the stencil. I intentionally do it a little bit below because if you've done this, you probably know that when the powder is below the top surface of the stencil, you can get some perfect designs on the shelf. It's usually when you go too much and powder falls in that you get stuff that needs to be cleaned up. So I make these so they come out like this. They don't need much cleaning, but right now he's too thin to use. Here's how I address that. This is a floral frog. They use them for flower arrangements. I don't know why they call them frogs, but they're awesome. It's like a bed of nails. They're awesome for setting a wafer on when you want to sift more powder on it, but you don't want it to pile up around the edges. Because if I did that with this one, it would be really hard to pick it up or get it off of a flat surface and not mess it up. But on top of the frog, and they come in different sizes and shapes. I have these too. And what I'll usually do is, first I always make sure my frog is clean. Nobody likes a dirty frog. And put a paper under there so I can recover the powder. Take some glue. And you can build up the thickness of your wafer and put him back in the kiln. I would put him on a little shelf. I would put a shelf on top because they tend to curl when you do this. But if you put a shelf on top and fire it again, you will get back a wafer that still needs little to no cold working, so your arms are safe, but is now thicker than it was before. And if you wanted, you could do that a third time. It's a great way when you're trying to build up something, especially like the little bare trees, which is another one of our most popular stencils, but it's all little narrow branches, and they're really tough to work with. But if you make them on the thin side deliberately so that they come out perfect as far as visually, even if they're too thin, and then build them up with one or two more firings, you can get a perfect little tree that's nice and thick, colors won't bleed through, and you didn't have to be a brain surgeon to successfully file down rough edges. This is a little bear that I made, and I haven't cleaned them all off, but I took him and I actually put red on the other side when I thickened him. So this is also a really cool way you can make two-sided wafers that, and this guy, I don't think you'll probably be able to hear it. The microphones we have are almost too good at blocking out anything but voices, but if you can hear that, he's pretty tough. He's like more a sheet of glass or a thin sheet of glass now than he is a powder wafer, but it is all powder, and it was made by building him up over multiple firings. And so far, I've done no cold working of any kind on him, and he's got nice, perfect edges. Yeah.
What happens if you place the original snowman on a project in the fire?
So the question was, what if I take this original snowman, who's really thin, and I put him on a project and fire? It depends what I fire him on, but the color here is so thin. If you've ever fired a wafer that was too thin, you know how the color bleeds through whatever it's on top of. So if I wanted a nice solid blue snowman, this would not give it to me, because anything I put this on, by the time I'm done full fusing, it's too thin to really block out whatever's underneath it. So you can use them, and you know, I have seen some beautiful work with deliberately made thin wafers. There's lots of bleeding through of color. It can have a very painterly look. So it's not to say one way is right or wrong, but if you want that solid color, really crisp design, you don't want anything bleeding through. Sometimes, a lot of times, you can get that on a single wafer just after one firing if it's bigger. But when there's a lot of fine detail, or when they're smaller sometimes, but especially when there's really difficult detail that's almost impossible to clean with the files, doing it in multiple steps gets you there a lot easier and with better results. All right, let's see. I want to show you some cold working tips in the sense that we cold work our wafers. Hopefully you all know about this guy, the wafer workbench, which is a great tool for cleaning up wafers. And two things I want to show you. So here is a hibiscus. And if you look, you will notice there's a bunch of stuff clogging up between the leaves. So the first thing is I usually start work with the wafer down. And that's because it fired down and this side is flatter and so it sits better. Here, which is not uncommon, you get a little bit of thickening around the edge. And if I put him down and start working, there's more of a chance to break because it's lifted up a teeny bit. So I have shown people in previous demos that you can take a file and work your way through. If I want to separate, you can see how that's separate. There's actually an easier way and a less prone to break, because this way, that up and down, they'll still break sometimes. But if you take one of these little round files, or whatever size works for you for what you're doing, and you lay it sideways, I don't know if you can see how long that line got and how quickly it did just by going sideways. So I'm going to do this one. You can all see that in here it's all filled up. And because of the way I'm holding it down flat against the board, it is highly unlikely it's going to break. It's highly unlikely what just happened is going to happen. I knew as soon as I said that. But hopefully you can see how that worked. I'll show you one more time. We'll cover that so you can't see the broken part. Go away.
Someone wants to know if the single square spacers are sold separately.
Yeah, they are. If you go into basic shapes, it's just the large square single. There's two different options. There's the large square set that has concentric squares. It's a 3 stencil or 4 stencil set. But then there are also large squares that are just single stencils. So again, you can see how easily that did. Usually I'm more careful. When I'm doing stuff like this, I tend to be rougher because I'm trying to get through it. That's my excuse, and I'm sticking to it. All right, so that is one thing. The other thing I want to show you, the other wafer I'm going to break for you, no, just kidding, is sometimes they come out like this too. So here is a Texas bluebonnet, and you'll notice there's a lot of this kind of fuzzy, lacy stuff around the edge and in between. Sometimes the easiest way to clean stuff like that up, you want to hold down the piece you're cleaning. So I'm going to clean right here. And I'm just going to take the tip of this and upright, and I'm very carefully going to just kind of drag through. And I'm actually just going to go around the leaves. Make sure you're holding the leaf when you're doing this, but rather than go and file, because it's so thin, it's almost like I'm just drawing or tracing around it. And hopefully you can see on the camera. Just scraping along the edge like I have. It's as if I'm taking a pencil and tracing around it. I'm always holding the leaf that I'm pressing against, even though I'm not pressing against that hard. So, still some work to do, but you can already see. Hopefully you can see on there. I'm not sure how well you can, but there's still a lot of stuff around this edge, and you can see where these leaves are still bound together here, just by taking this little tip and tracing around, we'll clean it up.
The files are from Amazon.
Yeah, the files are from Amazon. If you go to the Wafer Workbench on fusingfactory.com, and you can do that either, it's under Tools on the product menu, the shopping menu, or just by searching for Workbench, or in the description for that product at the bottom, there is a link to Amazon for some files. There's lots to choose from, but if you can't find ones you want, those are the ones that I use, and they work well. All right, let me show you another cold working tip. So I've got a big bow here. Put a bow on it.
Can you use a Dremel tool with a diamond tip for cleaning the edges?
Question is, can you use a Dremel tool? You absolutely can. You just want to be really careful. I would start, you want to develop a light touch. And so I would practice with some wafers that you don't care about and play with different speeds and see what you're comfortable with. I do, when I do thicker pieces like this bear that I showed you, that's now a pretty solid piece, if I want to clean these up, a lot of times I'll go to a Dremel at that point. Although the diamond ones still, the little diamond ones work pretty well. So I've got a wafer. This one's not too bad, but because we work in layers, a lot of times the thickness of our wafers is very uneven because we do a centerpiece, then we do the next one and it builds up. And so the outermost one is the thinnest and they kind of get fatter towards the middle where the design details are. Here's a great way to get your wafer back down to flat. And it doesn't take a whole lot. You take a diamond hand pad, put this on a flat surface, and you can see it start to come down. It comes down pretty fast. So if you've got a wafer and it's got either, sometimes it's that little edge like I talked about that's a little too thick and so it leaves a gap when you put it down, or it's got places where there are design elements that it's too thick, you can take a diamond hand pad and very quickly sand down the entire back to being perfectly flat. And because my wafer is flat against a surface and fully supported, I can actually press down pretty hard, which makes this go even quicker. Yeah, question about the spacer.
Okay, when wanting a thicker stencil like branches, what would happen if you use the spacer initially rather than do pass without spacer and second pass with spacer?
Can you read that to me one more time, please?
Yeah. What would happen if you use the spacer initially, so start with it, rather than do the pass without it and then the second pass with it?
So the question is, what if you just start with the stencil on top of the spacer? That will work. The reason I like to do the one first against the shelf is because then you get that perfectly crisp edge. And then when you lift it, when you take the stencil off, put the spacer on, and then you put the stencil back, the bottom of the stencil, there's a surface there. It's the top of the powder you already put down. So it's not falling in that case, it's not falling at all outside the bounds of the stencil. You can do it. It's not a huge difference. You get a little bit better results if you do it in that two-step way. Right, what else we got? So we've done that. We've done that. Oh, this is just a really just a simple little thing, but I think it's kind of fun. Again, I'm going to use my, I'll use the square one. going to use my flower toad. And I'm going to take, oh, got one color. Let me grab it. There's a lot of ways that you can decorate wafers, you know, especially things like this. We've got wafers that are, you know, just silhouettes. You can certainly use them that way. But the other thing you can do is after they're wafers, there are a couple of ways you can embellish them. One is with enamels. Angela has done this a lot. We posted a picture of a big plate where she painted onto flowers. Hey, Angela? What? You know, is your big plate where you've got painted on the wafer flowers? Yeah. Can you bring that to me, please? All right. Thanks. So you can certainly use enamels. It's a great way, you know, whether you're just putting a little black dot to give your mousse an eye or you want to do more elaborate. You can also use powder. And so I can go and I'm going to make it look like my little mousse was out in the snow.
Isn't good.
Thanks. So, so, and then I can take him, throw him back in the kiln, and I get a little mousse with some wintry highlights on him. So it's another way to make wafers more your own. And then I'll show you, here are some wafers where Angela, you can see she painted. She put a little gold mica on this one. Ooh, there we go. It's a little bit of gold mica. And she put a little bead in the middle of that one and the little yellow dots. Painting on wafers is a huge amount of fun because painting on glass can be hard because the glass is so slippery and it's hard sometimes to get a good paint stroke. Wafers are like the perfect surface for painting on. And then this is, let me go ahead. This is a piece that she made with some flowers. And then I'm going to show you, you can see here's one that's painted. She put beads in all of them, the little dichro dots, which looks really good. And then you can see she added some paint to that one too. So enameling on wafers, powdering on wafers for decoration is another great way to add some unique design to it. Let's say you are doing these branches. You know, we sell some stencils where there's multiple parts and things. Probably the most extreme case of that is the multi-part snowman. Let's say I want to do these branches, but I want to do two different color branches. One easy way is to just do one on a shelf and then get another shelf. But I want to show you a good way to like control where powder goes. And this can be really helpful if you've got a stencil where within a single stencil you want to do more careful powder color placement. I will take a piece of cardstock, go this way. And let's say I'm going to do first, I will trace, and I don't have to do a really neat or complete job, but I want to get to enough to see where this. All right, so I'll then take Back of your powder printer makes a great cutting surface. And I am going to cut right around where I traced. Now take, so I remember how I oriented this. I can't figure it out. There we go. I can now go ahead and sift over this one. The whole thing up together. I didn't do a very good job of lifting there, but you get the idea. Then I would cut another one for this, or because a lot of our stencils are reverse, I don't think, no, that one's a separate branch, a separate design. You would have to cut another one. But you can do that and just block off different areas of your stencil to do different parts, different colors. And then what I would recommend is once you cut these, just save them in your envelope with your stencil. Right. And then the last thing I want to talk about tonight, because we've had a lot of questions about it, is how do you do this, which is put a wafer in between two sheets of glass. There have been a bunch of posts on Facebook about what's the right sequence of events, how do you do it? And I want to show you how I do it, because you'll notice in both of these, I did a couple of samples that they are pretty much bubble free. You see that? There's like no bubbles in there. The way that I do that is I start out and I powder the back of my piece. And I will usually use clear powder. Good solid covering it. Not deep, but it covers the whole thing. I then take, now I'm working on this little shelf. If you're doing bigger, you can do this on your regular kiln shelf. And then here's the secret sauce. I am going to take 4 little pieces of clear frit. Any of you who've taken my beginner class will remember seeing this as a similar approach for eliminating bubbles. But I'm going to put 4 little pieces of frit like that. And then I'm going to take my clear piece. It's actually a good idea before you do this. If you trace your piece of glass on the shelf, you know exactly where to put these pieces of frit. I forgot to do that, but that's okay. And so my glass is now elevated a little bit above the wafer. I'm going to fire this with a long bubble squeeze. And by long, I mean at least an hour at 1225. And honestly, a lot of times I'll do 2 hours at 1225. And what that's going to do is it's going to let the middle of this glass sag down, hit the middle of the star. And then as the heat continues to pour in, the glass will soften and that point of contact will spread and it squeezes the air out. And after you fire that, you end up with something that looks like this. So I'll grind these little bits off. I don't care about those. If I'm worried, I'll make the clear piece, the first one, a little bit oversized. Here's another one where the pieces of frit actually pretty much melted right in. You can't even see them. But there's the top. So it was oriented like that. And then once you have this, you would put a light sift of clear powder over this and just set your other piece on top and full fuse with a bubble squeeze again. But it's that first fuse that lets you go and get it so it's flat on the back so that when you put this second piece down, you don't have that gap around a powder wafer you would if you just took two clear pieces and tried to sandwich it and do it in one firing. Yeah, question?
Can I use papyrus instead of kiln wash on the tile and it doesn't curl like thin fire?
So thin fire doesn't curl anymore. That is many years ago. They have fixed that problem. But no, you should not use shelf paper for wafers. And the simple reason is that when the binder burns out of shelf paper, there are lots of little powdery particles that can get embedded in the powder. So I've had a couple people say that they use it and they're happy with it. I'm genuinely happy for them, but I have seen lots of powder wafers and lots of projects ruined because you get the fiber buried in the powder.
Plus, you get many, many uses out of one shelf wash, kiln wash shelf.
Yeah, that's true too.
Low temperature.
Angela makes a really good point. You know, we kiln wash these shells for just powder wafers, and we'll get, I won't say endless, but we'll get 5, 6, 10 sometimes firing from a single shelf because we're only going into the 1200s and the glass doesn't stick. So you actually get more firings from the kiln wash than you would from the shelf paper. So we covered how to sift multiple light layers. We talked about when you do a pattern stencil, you use a rectangle as the second, or the square as the second stencil to put a backing on it so it's one whole piece. We talked about using a spacer when we have overlapping elements where the stencil plastic sits on top of powder from a previous item and that the spacer gets it up. We talked about using the same spacer to sift a design, lift that stencil off, dump it, put the spacer down, put the stencil back, and go on for story. You know, it's like a 2-story building, another story on top, another layer. Talked about taking wafers, powdering them if you want to make them thicker, especially if it's something really delicate like that snowman. Making a really thin one because thin ones are easier to get the design right. It's as you get thicker that your edges tend to get a little bit messed up. So we make a thin one deliberately that's nice and crisp and clean, takes no cold working, but is too thin. And then we sift over that, putting it on top of the frog. Let's see what else. We did we talked about flattening curled wafers between shells. Talking about cleaning up wafers by filing with the file horizontally with just inside, especially tight grooves and inlets and corners. We talked about using the file upright and just tracing around the edge of a wafer with the tip a lot of times is all it takes. Always make sure you're holding the wafer close to wherever your file is. Talk about using a diamond hand pad to flatten ones. The other thing I meant to tell you about hand pads, I forgot one thing, is that you can take a hand pad also. Sometimes when you have a wafer, there's a little bit of extra. Let me go back to this view. So you might have little bits of extra powder from a first color that were out of bounds, and so now you've got little spots. If you take a diamond hand pad to the front of a wafer, you will really a lot of times crisp up that design a lot and take the little defects that were down on the shelf, on the surface will come right off. So if you ever have a wafer and the design looks a little fuzzy, hit the face of it with the diamond hand pad, and a lot of times that'll fix it. All right, hold on one second. Let me just finish the list. So we talked about the diamond hand pad, talked about decorating wafers with both enamel and with powder in a second firing, blocking using the cardstock, and sandwiching between two clear layers, multiple steps. What were the questions?
All right. Is that first fuse also a full fuse? I think when you were doing the sandwich.
So when I do the sandwich, no, it is closer to a contour fuse. That one I did to give me a second. I went with that one to that was 1425 for 15 minutes in my kiln. Was the clear on top of the wafer with the little chads, and that gave me a flat piece. You may have to play with your kiln to figure out what works best for you. And it may change a little bit if you're sandwiching. Let's say that you're sandwiching, you want clear on one side, but you want opaque on the other. You might have to play with your schedules.
Does it have to be 2 sheets of glass, or could I use a single sheet to keep the texture of the wafer?
No, this is just if you, that whole demo was only if you want. That was only if you want to sandwich between layers. You can absolutely use that technique to just fuse it into a single layer and still have a smooth project, or you can tack or contour fuse them on the top if you want there to be even more texture. One of the cool things about this plate is that I don't know that you can really see it, but this blue flower here, there's a little bit of curl in those petals. And so it actually comes off. It's really cool. It comes off the plate a little bit. It's still solid, and there's glass behind it, but it's raised a little bit. So this is always was more of a tack fuse than it was a full fuse. And the texture is really nice, and that worked well with the Vitrograph for the stems too.
What temp again did you fuse the star to the glass? What size frit for lifting the clear up for the?
I used a piece of coarse frit in each corner, and the temperature was 1425 for 15 minutes. If you're not sure, or you really want to make sure that it really seals up well, and make your clear piece oversized by a few inches in all directions. Excuse me. That way, if you go too hot, your edges are going to start to thicken up a little bit. I'm sure you've all seen this. So if you don't want that, by making the clear piece a little bit bigger, you can go a little hotter, get a better fuse, and then just trim off those thick edges. Transparent versus opaque powder. The base, it really depends what you want to do with it. If you're looking for some of that painterly, the bleed through and stuff, transparents are great. If you want your powder wafer to stand out and not have whatever's behind it bleed through it all, you should at least have a base of opalescent. I use transparents a lot. I don't know if I've got one here to show you, but I use it a lot to shade things. So let's say, let me grab an appropriate stencil. Let's say that I was doing this lotus design. And I wanted to shade the tips. I was going to do a pink lotus, but I want the tips to be a deeper pink. Well, what I would do, or maybe I want to do pink with little purple tips. I would take a little gold purple transparent, and as my first layer, just touch. I'd probably use the one of the flat bottom stencils, and I would just put a little bit of the gold purple down first at the tips, and then I'd come behind it with the opalescent pink. Transparents are great for shading other colors. They can be used for the whole wafer, but they're a little bit different in the translucency as you would expect when they get full fused to something.
Yeah.
All right. If you haven't seen it, we just rolled out a brand new class. We're crazy excited about it. We've talked about it for a long time. It's a jewelry class. And take a look at the posts that I made and look on the site. You can click right from the homepage. There's some really cool stuff. And I'm pretty sure most people will find it, a lot of it, they've never seen anything that looks quite like it before. So,
yeah, it's exciting.
Thanks for being here. Have a great weekend, and we will see you around.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.